Welcome to the SAFE-T Chronicles, exploring how to keep people and pets safe from the cycle of interpersonal violence. I am your host, Allie Phillips, founder and CEO of Sheltering Animals and Families Together, the SAFE-T Program, a nonprofit organization working with domestic violence shelters to eliminate the pet housing barrier to safety. As the founder, I have led the global movement in helping domestic violence shelters create on-site pet housing while elevating the criminal justice response to how animal abuse links to crimes against people. I am a former prosecuting attorney, internationally recognized legal expert, and public speaker, award-winning author, and advocate for protecting vulnerable victims. In this podcast, we will explore how and why animals are harmed in the cycle of family violence and the human-animal bond that keeps victims in harm's way with their pets. Guest speakers and I will share strategies for shelters and professionals working to safeguard survivors, why pet-inclusive sheltering is life-saving, and safety tips for those who need help. None of the content will be graphic. If you are in harm's way, please contact your nearest domestic violence shelter or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Let's get started. Welcome to the very first podcast of the SAFE-T Chronicles. Oh my gosh, this has been such a thought process for many years. I have always wanted to have a podcast for the SAFE-T program. But when I looked at all the things that had to be done to have a podcast, I just kept thinking, number one, I don't have the time. Number two, it's going to cost a small fortune. And with this being a nonprofit, I am very conscious about how I spend donor dollars. And then I learned that YouTube has podcasting abilities. So I am very excited to launch this because I am not aware of any podcast that covers this topic. This is near and dear to my heart. So in this inaugural podcast, first of all, welcome. Please share this podcast and have people subscribe to this YouTube page who love animals, want to help animals. Maybe they are domestic violence survivors. Maybe they are child abuse survivors. Maybe they work in a domestic violence shelter, or they are a child protection worker. Maybe they are a police officer. They're in law enforcement. They're a prosecutor. They're a medical professional. They're in the therapeutic counseling field. They're a veterinarian. Everybody that I just named has the potential at some point to come into contact with somebody who is being victimized in the home that has pets. And when you learn how you can help and how you can create a pet-inclusive domestic violence shelter in your community, you're going to feel pretty darn good, okay? So let me dive in. Let me explain what Sheltering Animals and Families Together is all about. So the acronym spells safety, not SAFT, okay? I hear that all the time. It spells safety because that's exactly what this program is all about. So why did I create the SAFE-T program? So I have been in the field of criminal prosecution as an attorney since 1993. Since even before I graduated law school and became licensed as an attorney, I spent a year as a student acting as a prosecutor. So I have been in this field since 1993. At the moment of this recording, I have been in the field 30 years. Man, do I feel old saying that. I don't feel like I've been in, but yet I have been in the criminal justice field, the criminal prosecution field for 30 years, both in the courtroom and still training professionals to this day. So why did I create this concept? So let's go back in time to, I think it was 1996, could have been 1995, could have been 1997, but I know it was very early on in my criminal prosecution career. And it was at a time that I was working misdemeanor court. Misdemeanors are crimes that are under a year penalty. Okay. So I spent most of my time as a prosecutor as a felony prosecutor. So that's the real serious crimes putting people in prison. So it was only a very short time period that I was in misdemeanor court. So that's why I narrow it down to like 95, 96, potentially 1997. This is what happened. So it was a very, very busy jury trial day. So we would get assigned to a judge and we would handle all the cases in front of that judge for a year. And certain days of the week, we would have jury trials, we would have bench trials, we would have preliminary examinations on felony cases. So each day had a theme. So it was jury trial day. And I remember showing up with probably 50 cases, all set for jury trial. So I was in the process of working plea deals with all the cases, because clearly I can't take 50 cases to trial. So I'm working out all the cases. I'm in my little conference room at the end of the hallway, just outside the courtroom. I've got a hallway full of defendants, defense attorneys, police officers, witnesses, crime victims. It was chaos. Okay. Sometimes we called it cattle call day. It's like, bring in all the cattle. So I'm working. I'm getting through all my cases. I get to the very last case. There is a woman standing in the corner of the hallway. And so I go up to her and I ask her name. She tells me her name. She's my crime victim. I take her into my little conference room and I let her know that her husband was unwilling to admit any wrongdoing for what he had done to her. And it was bad what he did to her. And she couldn't even look at me. She had her face lowered. And in a very, very silent way, she said, I want the case dismissed. And so I explained to her, this was post O.J. Simpson, where all the rules regarding domestic violence changed. And I was actually a domestic violence trainer at that time. And so I knew our new law inside and out. And I said, unfortunately, by law, I'm not allowed to dismiss this case. You're here. We need to go forward. And I want you to understand, it's not you versus your husband. It is the people of the state of Michigan versus your husband. And you're a witness. And whether you want to get on the stand or not, I need to call you to the witness stand. And to protect you, I can say that you're getting on the stand against your will. Okay, if that helps keep you a little more safe. And then she said words that I will never forget. Again, not able to look me in the eye. She said, I went back home last night. Oh. Why did you go back home? You were at a shelter, you were safe. And she said, I went back home because he had already killed one of my dogs. I still have 2 dogs and a goat. And I'm quoting her because this is burned on my brain. She said, I would rather go home and die protecting my animals than to walk away like a coward and have him slaughter them. I'd never heard such a thing in my life. No one was talking about how animal abuse is linked to family violence. No one was talking about it. The research was just starting at the national level, but in my little community in mid-Michigan, in the capital of Michigan, never heard of it. I was horrified. I was livid. So I walked into the judge's chambers. I picked up the phone. I called my local domestic violence shelter and I said, hey, I have a lady. I'm going to have my detective bring her over. And they said, great, we have room. And I said, fantastic. And then I'm going to have the detective come back with her 2 dogs and a goat. The worker on the other end of the line laughed at me and hung up. For people who know me really well, they know that when I get very quiet, there is a storm brewing and I'm about to blow with anger. And even the judge, so it was the judge, her um her administrative assistant, her bailiff, her court reporter were all in the office with me along with the detective, and she looked at everybody and she said, everybody back into the courtroom, Allie's going to blow. And I just stood there, and my detective put his arm around me and he said, do we need to leave? And I said, mark my words, I'm going to do something about this. This is not okay. She would not get on the witness stand. There was nothing I could do, and I wasn't going to endanger her any more than she was. So I watched her walk hand in hand down the courtroom hallway with her abusive, battering husband. And when they got to the end of the hallway, he turned and looked over his shoulder at me and winked at me. And my detective had to hold me back. I was so angry. What was I going to do? I don't know. But I wanted to chase after them. I never saw her again. I don't even remember her name, but I have this burned in my brain. I never saw her again. And the sad thing about domestic violence, I usually saw the same defendants and the same victims over and over again. I never saw her again. I don't know if she was safe. I don't know if she got away. I don't know if he did anything to her. Because the next day I was back in court with another 50 files. But it stayed. It weighed on my heart. But what is interesting, in that moment, standing in the judge's chambers, I literally had a download. That's the only way I know how to explain it. I had a download of exactly what to do. And that download is the SAFeTy program. So I was still a prosecutor. And at that moment, I decided I needed to start researching how animal abuse links to domestic violence and child abuse, and even elder abuse. Elder abuse was not even being prosecuted back then. Neither was animal abuse. So I started digging into it, and I wasn't finding anything. I mean, I didn't even have a computer in my office. It's not like I could get on the internet and just start Googling. Google didn't exist. Okay. This was at the beginning of the internet. I literally did not have a computer at home. So a couple years go by, I start volunteering at my local animal control shelter as a way of getting back in touch with my softer side, because I was getting very hardened as a prosecutor, very hardened. Had to, in order to survive the horrific cases that I was dealing with as a felony prosecutor at that point. So I laugh about it because I was horrified with my animal control shelter. It was like a 95% euthanasia rate. They were selling the animals out the back door to a research facility. Rest assured, I ended that. And here, just for I wrote a book about it. It's on Amazon if you want to get it. So anyway, did a lot of good work at the animal shelter. But when I was at the animal shelter, I started hearing the shelter administrative staff talking about how we just seized 10 dogs from, I will change names to protect the guilty, from Bob Doe. Wait a minute, I have Bob Doe on my felony docket for felonious assault. That's an assault with a weapon, for illegal possession of weapons in his home, and a host of other crimes. And it's like, he's being investigated for dog fighting? Huh. Isn't that interesting? I started putting two and two together. And that's when I was able to do a little more research and find some books. Again, very, very little on the internet. Internet was fairly new at that time. I started making the connections, and then I started going through the information in my prosecutor's office, pulling all the animal abuse cases by hand. Okay, they were all physical files. Started pulling them. I was horrified at how little, well, nobody wants animal abuse, but we all know it happens. And I was surprised at how few cases we had because I saw the animals in the shelter. So it's like, where is the criminal prosecution? And then the files that I saw, oh my gosh, what my colleagues were doing, it's like, you're not handling this case properly. Like this is not okay. So I started putting information together. I started teaching locally on how animal abuse links to domestic violence and child abuse based on my real life experience as prosecutor. Fast forward to 2003, I leave the courtroom. I move out to Washington, D.C. I start working for the National District Attorneys Association, which is the training organization for prosecutors and law enforcement. On my first day, I asked my boss, bless his heart, most amazing man in the world. I was assigned to the Child Protection Division. And I asked him, I said, can I start researching how animal abuse links to child abuse? And he's like, do what you want, go for it, create a training program. And I did. I started training on it. I started linking it to domestic violence. I'm writing articles. I mean, I'm writing federal monographs, federal, documents that are still available today online. I launched a whole training there. And then I ended up like 4 years later, being recruited to the American Humane Association, where I was running their legislative office. Again, doing more training through that organization. And that's when I wrote the first set of guidelines for what is now known as the SAFE-T Program. Because in all of this training, people thought I was crazy about, okay, we have all these link crimes. We have police officers going out to a domestic violence situation. The animal has been harmed. You don't leave the animal behind. You got to investigate that, but you got to pull the whole family out. We would never ask a domestic violence victim to leave children behind. Why are we asking them to leave animals behind? Because the animals are being targeted to lure them back, because that's exactly what happened with my lady in court. She was lured back with the threat of her animals being killed. So I start talking about this, and it wasn't being talked about back then. So in 2008, first set of written guidelines came out, and I knew of 4 domestic violence shelters that were housing pets on site. I worked with them, helped them with their policies. They helped me build the program. I actually helped with an on-site program in Arlington and spent a lot of time with them. And so the concept was born. Fast forward 3 years later, I rename it. I take it out of American Humane, I rename it, the SAFE-T Program. And now this manual is in its 3rd edition. This is free to domestic violence shelters. I will put the link in the description below. Free to domestic violence shelters. If you are not a domestic violence shelter, I'm sorry, but there is going to be a fee for this, and not everybody gets access to this, because unfortunately some organizations have taken my copyrighted information and written it off as their own. So I have to protect the intellectual property of this for the SAFE-T Program, but this manual is intended for domestic violence shelters, not animal shelters, and not advocates in the community, okay? So, but through this podcast, you're gonna learn ways that you can help depending on what your profession is, or what your interest is, or what your hobbies are, or what you advocate for. So, so if you are a domestic violence shelter, please look in the link below and request this. It's a digital version, and it's got everything that you need, including forms that that you can download. Their Word version, their forms, and it's going to help you create your on-site pet housing shelter, because the SAFE-T Program is a solution to link crimes where animal abuse links to family violence. It's the solution. Get everybody out to safety so that they are never lured back in order to safeguard their pets. And that's how the SAFE-T program was created. Okay, so in this program, and I'm going to talk about this in later podcasts, there are 4 housing options where you can house pets either directly in the rooms with the family, an indoor kennel, an outdoor kennel, or in transitional housing. Okay, so through this podcast, I'm going to help you understand this link, the research, what's being done in the community. So I have been a member of what's called the National Link Coalition since 2008. I am on their steering committee, and it just now formed as a nonprofit, and I am on the board of directors. So I have been in this field a very long time. I am a criminal prosecution specialist in this field. I am a pet housing specialist in this field. So I am very passionate about this, because if we can save people and pets together and keep them together, that human-animal bond is very healing. I'm even going to talk about that. I have a huge list of topics to talk about in this podcast. So click the subscribe button so that you get notified each time a podcast is put on this page. So I don't know how frequently I'm going to do a podcast. Initially, I may load one every week. I think probably every other week at a minimum. So the more all of us can come together to identify when a person is being victimized, they have pets, maybe they have kids, and they need to get to safe sheltering together. That's what this podcast is about. So I hope you will join me on this journey, and rest assured, I don't talk graphically about abuse. I've never done that. I have literally done hundreds and hundreds, well over 500 presentations at conferences. Never once have I shown an abusive photo, and I don't talk graphically. You don't need to be traumatized in order to learn, okay? So rest assured, this is a safe place. And if somebody is in harm's way, this is also going to be a great podcast for them, because I'm going to give them helpful tools on how to get ready to leave. Okay, so stay with me for this journey, and thank you for being here. Please post a comment so that I know that you're here. All right, everybody, inaugural podcast in the books. All right, thanks for being here.